This is really about identifying the problems you have to solve in your supply chain, getting them rank ordered, pairing them up with either human assets or digital assets, and working as quickly as you can to have the change management right so you get the full utilization out of that gear that you just bought. The marriage of human and digital assets are going to have to accelerate much more quickly. And that's a place that I think we could all stand to really plus up our game.
Welcome to Supply Chain Champions, the show brought to you by Project 44, where we're talking to the people who make supply chains work. Hello and welcome to Supply Chain Champions. I'm your host, Eric Fullerton. I am joined today by someone whose supply chain journey went from a metal fabrication factory to Frito-Lay to 32 years at Clorox, culminating as Chief Supply Chain Officer, Rick McDonald. Rick, thank you very much for being here.
Eric, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So, obviously, as I just gave a very brief overview, you've had a long and successful career. You had about 10 years at Frito-Lay, 32 at Clorox. I guess it's several years. You're a chief supply chain officer, but many roles within the organization. What I wanted to ask is, when you look back at your career, can you pick a pivotal moment that you can identify that was really just like central to your eventual success?
First of all, I'm impressed you found the metal fabrication plant factoid. That is way back in the time machine. So well done on that. I think my moments of transformation and a pivot point was literally the moment I joined Frito-Lay. It was a very competitive culture, very process driven, some of the latest technology. And I was working with a very competitive group of people. And all of that just absolutely appealed to me. And when you combine that with the continuous improvement mindset that existed in the PepsiCo companies, and especially Frito-Lay at the time, that was super formative for me. And so in those first 10 years, I probably got 20 years worth of experience, or at least in my mind, that's the way I thought about it. And that propelled me and carried me forward through the rest of my career.
You joined Clorox, I believe, in 1992.
That's right.
Stayed with the company for over 30 years. And I think for some of our listeners who are, very experienced in supply chain later in their career, that seems very normal and exciting, interesting. I'm sure for some of our listeners, though, that may seem almost like a foreign concept. Right now, It's like 3-4 years at a company. So, I'm sure that there are many opportunities that you could have pursued outside of that company. I mean, why stay for 32 years?
For me, I can tell you when I joined Clorox, I didn't have the intention of staying 32 years. I like the people that I was going to work with. The work was interesting and new and different. And I gave it 5 years. I said to myself, I can make a difference here, but probably only for 5 years. The company was $1.7 billion. We reported earnings last year, 7.1. And so obviously a massive amount of growth around the world during that time period. And one of the reasons I stayed was the quality of the people, their competitiveness, their intellect, their sense of purpose and alignment with values that I hold dear to myself. Number two was the work I got to do. Am I learning something? Is it interesting? Am I being challenged? And am I getting to do things that are sort of pushing me into places where I'm not as comfortable? And then, just compensation kind of tie it all together. And over the years, I got a lot of different assignments around the world in various parts of our business. I worked in all 3 of our divisions for general managers, and it felt like different companies to me over that time period because I was getting so many interesting and different opportunities.
I'm a little hesitant to talk about this topic. I feel like it comes up in every supply chain conversation that's happened over the past 4 years. In some ways, it's a little overplayed, but I think in your instance, it's a very worthwhile topic. So, COVID-19 pandemic. A little bit of background for listeners. Obviously, Clorox was in a very unique position. You experienced some massive demand spikes, products like bleach and cleaning products, but from what I've heard you talk about this before, it also affected, other core product areas. You're talking trash bags and then charcoal and ranch dressing. And I've also heard you say that the company essentially went from a $6 billion company in revenue to $7 billion almost overnight,
Yeah.
which puts this massive stress, pressure on, and almost breaks resilience that you've baked into your supply chain. So, what were some kind of specific tactics that you employed to stay on shelves and to keep your customers happy and to bring back some of that resilience?
So a little bit of the backstory, and true, we did go from a $6 billion company to a $7 billion company overnight. And, nobody's supply chain is really set up to be that resilient. And we found out very quickly that there was a lot of truth in that. Starting about December 19th, we heard from our colleagues in China that COVID was a thing. Even though it wasn't getting talked about much in the US, and it was sort of being minimized a little bit. In January, I said, we're going to take our 4 day of supply targets for all of our products up. And we're just going to run as hard as we can in case it is something. Anticipating that, we'd have a lot of opportunities to sell, especially disinfecting products during that time period. So we did that. We ran really hard. And then, the world changed forever in March, April of 2020. And we were literally out of stock on almost everything by, let's say mid-May. So all of our best efforts to increase our days of supply, all that inventory was sold. And the demand continued to still be, in some cases, 500% of normal demand. And as an essential business, we were designated an essential business. Our job was to run as much as we could. And so the specific tactics we undertook was we streamlined our objectives. I said, we're going to have two objectives. We're going to keep our people safe and healthy, and we're going to run our plants as hard as we can, given the needs of our workforce, because we knew we couldn't burn them out at the same time. So doing all the things that we could to run hard, safely, but also understanding we didn't know how long we were going to have to run. You and I both remember there was a lot of, well, wait till the weather gets warm, COVID will go away. That didn't turn out to be true. Wait till it gets cold. That didn't turn out to be true either. All of that stuff was playing around in the ecosphere at that point in time, and it was just very uncertain. So that was one thing, two objectives. Second thing we did was we streamlined the number of SKUs we ran. I'll give you an example. Disinfecting wipes had a portfolio at the time of 120-ish SKUs. The general manager made a really quick and smart decision to say, we're only going to run 15. And obviously that maximized uptime, minimized downtime. It concentrated our suppliers on certain materials that they could produce for us to really allow us to build as much inventory as we could. And so then the other part was running our plants. And that meant creating an environment where our associates felt like it was safe to come to work. And, that was a period of time with great uncertainty. And under the heading of better lucky than good, made a decision to hire an epidemiologist about 6 weeks into the pandemic. We didn't go out and bid this. We didn't go out and source, 3 epidemiologists to see what the rates were. Somebody on my team knew an individual, Dr. Hudson Garrett. He was affiliated with the CDC, and he greatly helped us kind of think through what was likely coming next. So as an example, when people were running around with the handheld thermometers that many municipalities were requiring for people to come into work, we had all ours. When masks were in short supply, we had all ours. And social distancing, we were doing that, if not a little bit ahead of, but certainly contemporary with what the CDC was saying were things that should be done. And that gave our folks a lot of confidence that one of the safest places they could be was in one of our factories. And all credit to their courage and just everything they did for making as much product across all of our lines as they possibly could during that time period. And they were the real heroes in this story.
I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about inventory. I think we've seen in the industry these kind of evolutions or oscillations on the perspective of inventory, kind of fluctuating between just-in-time inventory, kind of increase that cash on hand, lower your inventory levels, to just-in-case, which obviously was critical in COVID and has kind of stayed that way. Which of those is best? When? Why? Like, how do you think about that?
We spent quite a bit of time thinking about that. And the reality is there's no one right answer.
Of course.
And it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve, and then how and where you think you should apply what I'll call insurance policies in your supply chain. And that is, in some cases, almost a manufacturing plant by manufacturing plant decision, a material by material decision. How many suppliers are there? Are you absolutely sole sourced? Are there any alternatives? One of the things that we did during COVID was we learned that we could source some of our products a lot of places that we never sourced them before. It's a big world. And, when you're just a $7 million company and you're really focusing on leveraging your supply with maybe a discrete supplier or two, you're not necessarily on the market scanning for. So we learned and drove more resilience in the organization by having more of a just-in-time mindset, especially as we got into and then post-COVID. That's helped us going forward. So I think the key is going to be, where are you really most vulnerable in your supply chain? What is your plan B? The reality is you can't afford an insurance policy for every single eventuality or every single material or plant. And so it's really going to be about strategically selecting those places where you think you're the most vulnerable.
So, obviously supply chains are complex, logistics is complex, operating these ecosystems is complex. But in some ways, the goal is almost simple. Like, I think about it as velocity, right? Really what you want to do is you want to get inventory where it needs to be faster, more efficiently, more cost effectively. Why is it so hard?
Well, there are several factors that play into this. And, the first one is the interests, the desires, and the timing of the consumer. For those of us consumer obsessed like Clorox and many other companies, trying to figure out that demand signal is a life's work. And so I think that's number one, is just understanding what the consumer is likely going to buy, when they're going to buy it, and where they're going to buy it. All of us are set up, or many of us are set up as forecast to stock operations, meaning we're going to have a lot of inventory as our insurance policy against consumer demand that we don't anticipate. That's number one. Number two is really the speed with which things are moving today. I call it operating at the speed of the consumer. None of us, you, me, anybody else who is watching this podcast, we're not going back from the conveniences that in some cases same day delivery has afforded to us, next day delivery, second day delivery. And that creates tremendous pressure on the supply chain. So you combine that with a demand signal that's already not super accurate, and then you throw in an element of speed, and now you've got a pretty complicated situation. And if you're making one or two things, you had 5 SKUs in your portfolio, that'd be one thing. But almost all of us have a very complicated portfolio trying to meet the needs of consumers in certain geographies worldwide. And so I think those are the things that come together and really drive the complexity within the supply chain and the challenges that we face.
I wanted to transition a little bit into talking about leadership. One of the things that you've talked about in the past is this importance of honesty and humility and how that can really help with leadership. And I think you mentioned this when you were kind of talking earlier in your career. You had many employees, direct reports that were actually significantly older than you. Can you speak to that both in that context, but I think probably just more broadly, how honesty and humility is an important cornerstone of leadership?
I'm actually going to take us back to my metal fabrication days and some things I learned in that operation, because that was in the metal fabrication plant. I had a chance to see, sort of 8 hours a day, how the foreman in the shop works, decisions that were made. I've got this efficiency gene inside me, and I just thought, wow, there are probably some better ways to do that. But there was really no interest in hearing input from somebody like me, an 18-year-old who was there for a summer job. Might not have the right answers, but I certainly have an opinion on how things could be done better. But nobody asked, nobody was interested. And that carried through to my early Frito days. I can't say that I had this, moment of, aha, this is what I shall do when I started at Frito-Lay. But it occurred to me that I needed to learn how things work from the people who actually knew how they worked, and not come in with the assumption that, because I had some degree hanging on my wall, that I had knowledge that I didn't have. And I saw a lot of supervisors literally fail because they did not recognize the importance of working with the people who knew what they were doing in the operations, had been doing it for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and asking questions. How does it work? What are your problems? Is there something I can help with? Those just seem like, well, sure, of course you'd ask those questions, but not everybody does. And I think approaching it like that, not with the idea that I was going to be anybody's friend, but as their supervisor, I can help out in solving some of the problems that made their life on shift more difficult. That kind of stuck with me. And so as I went into roles, I started calling it the voice of the customer. And I would always begin my roles with voice of the customer conversations. In one case, when I was asked to come and fix our global logistics group, there were about 150 people or so in that group spread out in various locations. I had a one-on-one with every single person. I needed them to know who I was, and I needed them to know that we were going to figure this out together, and that while I wanted everybody to make the journey, perhaps everybody wouldn't. And I needed their help to do their very best while we were on this transformation journey. So started it with the metal fabrication shop. The Frito experience greatly reinforced how important it was. And then I've leveraged that at other stops in my career.
When you think about the kind of more, in quotes, modern professionals, I think everyone wants to get promoted for good reason, right? They're thinking about the short game, which is like, how do I get promoted in the next 12 months or the next 18 months? But one thing that I think you've spoken about is that lateral moves in the short game may not be as compelling. In the long game can greatly enrich your career trajectory. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe even get specific with some of your examples?
I so strongly believe in this, and I've seen it play out both ways. People who have been in it for the long run, and they have taken the time to develop themselves to take lateral roles at the same grade level in service of learning something that they would want to apply, need to apply, had to apply later on. I've also seen it work out where people went in more of a vertical path and faster, and they got to a key role and they didn't have what it took to be successful. But the first thing I'd say is, regardless of what role you're in or what grade level, learn your craft. In every single job, be known for that person that delivers their commitments over and over and over again. Be reliable. And then this finding the balance between vertical grade level ascension and promotions and laterals to help you learn and facilitate your long career. That's the part that I think some folks are missing out on. For me, I spent 7 years at the director level in this company. That encompassed multiple assignments at the same grade level, working with some different people in different parts of the organization, learning some different skills that served me super well as I continued to advance my career. And had not had those assignments, I wouldn't have built the relationships I built. By the way, relationship here is much about, who are you and what do you do, as how does the person think? Do I trust them in challenging situations? Do I trust them in a large leadership role where they're going to be doing a lot of things autonomously? If your boss has to look over your shoulder, they get the wrong person the job. And so these large roles, you're acting autonomously on many, many occasions. And you're probably not going to get a shot at that job if your supervisor, your manager doesn't know how you think and doesn't trust your logic and your judgment in some of these very complicated, hard to solve decisions. So I'm a huge fan of taking lateral roles to gain that experience, to develop those relationships, to build that trust through the organization. The other thing it does is it allows you a chance to develop some followership and work on leadership skills with different groups of people. Every group is different. Every group has a different vibe, a different culture, a different constituency. And so the more of those unique situations you can put yourself in, the better served you're going to be in the long run.
People tend to think of their careers very linearly, but sometimes the best way to go up is actually to go sideways, even for a little bit. Not only just to get up there, but also like from understanding what your skill set is, learning new things, just evolving your kind of like background and structure, and that can help serve whatever that next role may be. So,
and I would add two things to that if I could, Eric. First of all, this hopscotching across the supply chain, I loved it. I'm a very adventurous person. I'm not an expert in everything. And certainly many of the jobs I went to, I didn't know a whole lot about them, but somebody trusted me enough to put me in them based on what I'd done previously. And it gave me the chance to learn something new and experience something new. And kind of back to how'd you end up here for 32 years? I kept getting new opportunities that kind of fueled my tank, gave me energy, challenged me, drove my stress level through the roof at times because of the combination of performance expectations and what I didn't know about the role, but that forced me to learn quickly. I would say the second thing is, and people look at me kind of like this sometimes when I say it, but take hard jobs, ask for hard jobs, and then do them well. It's one of your best ways to demonstrate to the organization that A, you're capable, you learn quickly, you can overcome obstacles that apparently somebody before you couldn't overcome, and you can make things better. If you gain a reputation for things that you touch get better, that is a reputation that will serve you very, very well. You're not going to get that by 2.5 year assignments as you move vertically through the organization. You're going to be lightly touching on those disciplines and those learnings, and you'll get to a certain point. Somebody will, well, I don't really know who she is. Or I'm not sure I've seen her in a hard job. That will not play well when you're competing for some of the most difficult and largest jobs in the enterprise.
I have a couple of kind of short style questions for you, almost like quick hits to close this out. I think you have obviously an interesting perspective on this, but what is one trait that all of the best supply chain professionals seem to have?
I think the best of us are exceptional at problem solving. It means with pace, grabbing the right set of data and or deciding without all the data, as we had to many times during COVID. We had to decide and go, there wasn't data. There was no history. But grabbing that data, curating the insight, and then acting decisively and convincingly, and in situations where you've got to convince somebody or a lot of people in the organization this is the right path, having the right 2x4 messaging that accompanies that explains what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so problem solving, I think, is that one thing that if you're in the supply chain, you're good at what you do, you're a really good problem solver.
Rick, it's funny. We've had the pleasure on this podcast of talking to a lot of great professionals, and the problem solving equals supply chain professional is something that comes up in every single conversation. So I kind of felt like you were going to say that. So it's just funny that these are just these common themes. It's just problem solving is one of those key moments. I'm not surprised to say that.
Well, and honestly, it's one of the things that makes this such a great discipline and a great choice for a career. If you don't mind uncertainty, you don't mind complexity, you don't mind hard problems, you like working with a lot of interesting people doing cool stuff. I mean, I can't think of a better place in an organization to plant your flag.
Absolutely. So I wanted to play a little game called Overrated and Underrated. We're experiencing lots of trends today as we speak. So I was hoping you could pick one trend that you think is overrated and why, and then one that's underrated and why.
I'll make this comment with respect to the fast-moving consumer goods segment. This concept of blockchain, we were super hot on that for a minute or two, and it's now cooled off. Do I think there's a role for blockchain at some future point as more supply chain visibility and ways to connect the supply chain end to end digitally occur? Yes, I do. At this point in time, though, that's not a place where I think a lot of us are investing or spending much of our mind share talking about. Underrated is the value of change management in digital transformations. And it is from personal experience, both sides of the coin. I can tell you when you do it well, it is amazing. When you don't do it well, it's equally disappointing. And it's one of the reasons why I think McKinsey's reporting only 30% of all digital initiatives are achieving the ROI that is promised by whoever got approval for the spending, is the change management. It's not about the tools. It's about the human beings involved. And it's the mindset, skill set, then the tool set, and change management across all that. And I think that's just a way underrated and underinvested component of digital transformations.
It's a great answer. I think all the tech, all the AI, supply chains is a people business, right? And you have to think about that part of it and actually to make use of whatever technology you may be investing in. I think it's a super important point. Is there one thing that you kind of wish everyone who worked in supply chain knew that would make the industry better for it?
If I sum up where I think the supply chain is going and what is going to be important in these next 5 years, it's the ability to digitally transform and to balance human assets with digital assets. Many of us are underinvested in tools and systems. The change management hasn't been there for some of the tools and systems we have invested in. And I think this concept of digital fluency in supply chain leadership is exceptionally important. What do I mean by that? Well, it's not A plus B equals C, that just because you grew up with a digital landscape, including your mobile phone, that you're somehow digitally fluent. I'm talking about technology solutions like artificial intelligence, including machine learning, robotic process automation. You've got Gen AI in the mix. So what are the problems you have, and can they be solved with some sort of digital solution? I think there are many leaders who are not up to speed enough. Their digital fluency isn't high enough for them to be able to have an informed conversation, first of all, and then make informed decisions about which problems to solve, in which order, with which tools, and what the balance of human and digital assets should be between that. For me, that would be one thing. If I could push a button and plus everybody up on one dimension, it would be their digital fluency.
All right. So one last question. This is a podcast, so, trying to go a little bit viral at least. And I want to ask you for your hot take. What's your hot take on the supply chain industry today, or where it's going? And you circled around the drain on a couple of these things a little bit. So what's your hot take?
This will not surprise you. I'm going to circle right back to this whole digital agenda idea. And my hot take on this is, you're not already transforming digitally, you're behind. This is really about identifying the problems you have to solve in your supply chain, getting them rank ordered, pairing them up with either human assets or digital assets, and working as quickly as you can to have the change management right so you get the full utilization out of that gear that you just bought. And it's focusing on the mindset of leadership. It's the upskilling and reskilling of all the people who will need to operate that new gear. And then it's deploying that tool set. And I just believe that because of human availability, not only numbers, but skills, and the speed of the consumer and the value that we all have to drive for that consumer through end-to-end visibility, the marriage of human and digital assets are going to have to accelerate much more quickly. And that's a place that I think we could all stand to really plus up our game.
Rick, you did really well on the rapid fire questions. I just wanted to thank you for spending some time with us today, talking about your experience, your expertise, your background, giving some really good advice for anyone who's interested in pursuing this profession or is already in it. Thanks for spending time with us. But most importantly, I think thank you for being a supply chain champion.
Well, I appreciate that, Eric. It's been a fun show, and I've enjoyed it greatly. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for listening to Supply Chain Champions. To get connected and learn more, visit project44.com and click the link in the comments to subscribe to Project 44's newsletter. Tune in, get smart, and move forward.